I am here today kind of as the substitute perhaps for Brother Louis de Thomasis. It was several years ago that Brother Louis, the former chancellor for many years, president and then chancellor of St. Mary's University of Minnesota, asked me to help him write a book about business ethics. And if you know Brother Louis or have read anything about him, before he joined the Christian Brothers, he was quite an entrepreneur and a businessman in his own right. He's also the founder of Christian Brothers Investment Services and Christian Brothers Investment Services Global in Europe, where he is today, and has great standing as a man of the academy and a man of faith and a man of business, and kind of operates at the confluence of faith and finance. We wrote the book, which is before you, Doing Right in a Shrinking World. We had a number of business people, a lot of anecdotal information. It was a national book, but we wanted to have a local perspective from people we thought were solid business people, and we had 14, 15, 16 of them. And one of them was Tom Petters. I like to tell Brother Louis I had never interviewed Tom until I interviewed him for the book, and Tom was an interesting guy to interview. I always figured he was one of those guys who barely got through high school, but made a lot of money selling flowers outside the cemetery on Memorial Day that he'd lifted from grave sites, just that kind of a guy. There are those guys in capitalism. I had no idea. In fact, Brother Louis was a little bit distraught when he started to read accounts of what had happened, and I thought, no, this is a great marketing opportunity for the book, because when you do my job, if you're not humble, you'll learn it, because anyway, as an unlicensed professional, you can fool me just about any time. But as the Tom Petters story showed, you can fool a lot of people. But in the end, you can't fool all the stakeholders. You can't fool your investors or your employees forever.
This scheme stretches back 10, 14 years, and it was just Tom Petters and Deanna Coleman. He would buy and sell overstock goods to little mom and pop shops in around the Minnesota and the upper Midwest. And then he would, he started growing a little bit, but he was dealing with distressed goods, which is a very cutthroat business. And he was, when the company went out of business, he'd go there and buy their overstock or their surplus, their retail stuff, and then he would sell it somewhere else. But at some point, he started defrauding these people and not paying them, not paying the shop owners, and making them sue him, and it just kind of percolated up from a very small operation. Although in the end, there were only 5 principals involved in the whole thing.
If you go to trial with this type of set of charges against you, and you lose a trial, you are well likely to face a life sentence.
When Mr. Petters first came in with his first request for living expenses to the receivership, they requested $227,000 a month. As you can imagine, I did not do that anywhere near that. But we've been doing all these assets, you know, to pay mortgages so that houses weren't foreclosed on and different kinds of things. During this, you know, I think of these guys as kind of cosmic crooks. $3.5 billion puts you in that really high elite category.
Tom Petters was a pretty likable guy. We didn't find, you know, other than once until the extent of the fraud became known. He was pretty well liked in the community. It's, you know, in retrospect, it's obviously why, because he had money to give to causes and to charities, to organizations, to schools. But I kind of think he cared about those things that he was providing funding for. His family talked a lot about how he would go to bat for them, for a relative with a drug problem, or a sister who was in an abusive relationship. So there's a real conflict here in this guy when you look at the bigger picture. And there's something that I've never kind of resolved, how these two people can go on parallel paths and coexist. I don't understand the mind of the criminal like that, who probably believed in what he was doing.
They advised Tom Petters that they could not be party to any effort to mislead the jury or the court. He said, "This has been my story since the beginning. It will always be my story. The others did it. I didn't realize what they were doing. I was fooled like other people. I insist on telling that to this jury."
Key questions you should always ask about ethical issues. Is it truthful? Is it fair? Is it legal? Will it build our good name? Is it beneficial in the long run to our shareholders, employees, communities? And I like to throw in, what would Mom think, or would you like to read about this board meeting in the newspaper? And obviously, Tom's organization, particularly at that funding level, wasn't tied into some of these considerations.
Where were the lawyers? Where were the auditors? Where were the other professionals? In particular, these middlemen, these handlers. We haven't heard them talked about yet today, but there were a number of people who got a cut. I mean, they were the people who brought the investors to the table. They got a commission, they got a percentage. They made huge amounts of money off of this scam. I mean, I'm not just talking about the lawyers who represented Tom Petters and his companies. I'm talking about all the lawyers. There were lawyers on both sides of the transactions. There were auditors who could have or should have been involved in looking at the inventories. As a profession, as professions, we need to be asking ourselves, how do we do a much better job in protecting not just our clients, but the public in the future?
Part of Tom Petters' persona of success was to own these public corporations, and they gave him a real legitimacy that he didn't otherwise have. And probably the biggest one was Polaroid. When he bought that, he bought it for $425 million, and basically not a penny was his own money.
For those of us trying to figure out how to stop, or at least reduce, white-collar crime, those are issues we really need to confront. And that's why I'm convinced that the ethics education that you can get at St. Mary's, and you can get at St. Thomas, will make a difference in the next generation of business leaders.